mbrëma dhe mirë se vini në Kallëzo për një me. Sonte e kam një mysafir special. Në javën e 25 vjetorit prej që kam përfundu bombardimet, Lord George Robertson ka ardhur në Kosovë dhe ka qenë i huaj vetëm i cili foli në shesh, do me thonë bashkë me presidentën, kryeministrin, për me ndo për shtypjet e tia të asaj të postit që e ka bu në Kosovë para 25 vjetëve. Lord Robertson ka qenë udhëheqës i trupave të NATO-s pas Solonës, viteve 99 dhe në 2003. Ta ndëgjojmë që ka me thonë me te, me folë për përshtypje që i ka pas kur ka ardhur në Kosovë. Mr. Robertson, welcome to Kosovo again.
Thank you very much.
What does it feel like to be back?
Proud.
Yeah.
Very proud because I reflect back on the 25 years and remembering when I came here for the very first time and the damage that was done and the problems that there were, but also the warmth of the welcome at that time and a sense of satisfaction that I helped to do something there, along with lots of other people, in order to liberate this country and to give it a chance to be a modern European multi-ethnic country. And that makes me proud.
25 years on, how close are we to that idea of a multi-ethnic Kosovo that you were brought in to peacemake and to create? Do you think we are a good example of it?
I believe you are a good example. I believe Kosovo is and can represent something where decency and rightness beat evil at that time. With a very limited military intervention, we did what we believed was right at the time, and we created something that essentially will be a matter for the Kosovars themselves, whether they are Albanian, Serbian, Roma, or the rest, can produce from it. All we did was produce the end state, you know, the rescue. After that, it's up to the people in the area, and I'm still hopeful that something will be produced that will be good and will be a brilliant example of humanitarian intervention.
If we want to reflect on this particular week, June 11, 12, 13, 14, as we were, as refugees, myself including, coming back in an unprecedented way. 1 million people returned home within weeks. That hadn't happened before. We sort of, I remember that we beat all security protocols. Security people were telling the refugees that it's going to be mined, that you shouldn't go back. We didn't listen. Should we have listened?
No, you were absolutely right. I think to do it, it would have been high risk. You've got to listen to what the advice is, and I remember the advice, but people wanted to come back. It was their homeland. They had been driven from it with unprecedented violence, and they were going to go back. And, you know, I remember that time so vividly, the telephone calls, because, you know, we were at a distance. General Mike Jackson on the phone, you know, late at night when the Russians were coming down from Tuzla.
So it's not actually candid moments. These were not very comforting days then.
It was very difficult. We could have lost. You know, I think people forget just how knife-edged it was.
No, I think we should remind people it was very, very chaotic. You had a real challenge. As an Albanian, I know that we were angry, we were quite revengeful because of years, 10 years of a decade of apartheid. How did you manage it all when you saw that these people you were saving suddenly were feeling quite vengeful?
Well, we knew that and we understood that, but we wanted to stop that. And that's why we put in some of the hardest troops in the British Army into Kosovo. You know, I remember vividly when I announced to the House of Commons that we were sending the Parachute Regiment and the Gurkhas in to reinforce the peacekeeping forces. And a sketch writer in the Daily Telegraph said, Mr. Robertson pretended that he was sending in the toughest guys in the British Army to be peacekeepers. But we knew that high-intensity warriors can be peacekeepers. Peacekeepers can't be high-intensity warriors. So we put in some of the toughest guys. In fact, one of them was sitting behind me on the plane coming in last night because we knew that there could be a problem. So we needed hard soldiers to be in there to make sure it didn't happen. You know, and that is exactly what happened.
But the other side of the coin is that those hard soldiers, no matter how hard, they couldn't stop what was going on. I was a journalist at the time. British soldiers in this town were trying to stop fires from homes of Romas, for example, and they were literally young adults were turning these houses on fire. British soldiers were finding them. They didn't know what to do with these people, like a hard soldier being lost to police. How much of an impossible task that was?
Well, it was difficult, but it's not impossible. And actually they succeeded. You know, the fact is that, you know, they maintained a reasonable degree of safety. They protected elderly, you know, Kosovo Serbs around there. And if you go to the exhibition that's on at the National Museum of Kosovo today, I was there at the opening of a photographic exhibition, a remarkable one. I hope all your listeners, viewers, will go there. This was an embedded photographer who took photographs of people. Every photograph has a story of these soldiers from all the different nations who were looking after people. Children, you know, playing football with the soldiers. Who are now, these are probably adults, you know, may even be grandparents today. So they did their best. It couldn't be perfection because...
And they might have done their best, but if you ask the other side, it wasn't actually it wasn't a success because Pristina and many Kosovo towns were cleansed of Serbs and Roma. So what would you say if they said, well, this wasn't a success?
Well, you're never going to get complete success. After the violence, the hideous violence perpetrated by Milosevic's military and the paramilitaries as well, you were not going to create Switzerland or Scotland overnight. So we fully recognized that, and we were intent on mitigating the worst excesses of that, and I believe that we did, and we created the conditions whereby, you know, a reasonable degree of stability and peace was going to be restored. And some of the stories that were told at the time, and I remember on the streets, you know, of people being protected. But, you know, you can't have a period where Serbia or Milosevic was ethnically cleansing an area and then people are going to sort of smile and be terribly grateful for it. There is bound to be a period beyond which you build the multi-ethnic country again.
So what was the toughest time? Can you remember the toughest night, sleepless night, anything that kept you awake, or some situation where you thought, well, I'm not going to be able to control this?
Well, I don't think at any point we thought we weren't going to control it, but there were nights when we couldn't bomb because the clouds were too low. You know, there were times when we were hitting the wrong targets. You know, people came to me very late at night showing me photographs, you know, and I had to sort of sign the bottom in order to say that they could bomb, and the next day the building wasn't there. You know, when I was Secretary General of NATO, one of my last visits was to Belgrade, and they took me on a tour of all the buildings we bombed during that period.
Really?
You know, the General Staff Headquarters, the Ministry of Defence, the Ministry of the Interior Police Headquarters, you know. But we forensically did it. This must be the only time in recorded history where a capital city was bombed and nobody left. Nobody left, because our bombing was designed to take out the heartland of the military endeavour, and no more than that. And these buildings were all destroyed, and even the trees round about them untouched.
Because I've embarked on a project looking at archives of that time, I go to Belgrade to find the archives, and exactly the building you're talking about, which is really interesting how Serbs, 25 years on, the military building in the center of town, that is a huge compound, the center of the HQ of a Serbian army, is still destroyed. They refuse to rebuild it. And it had, now, it had something new I had never seen before. A huge flag inscription that goes all along the road saying, when the army returns to Kosovo. When the army returns to Kosovo. It's a famous saying, kad se vojska vrati na Kosovo. We didn't have this kind of revival of an ambition that Serbia is showing, of wanting, at least declaratively, to come back to Kosovo. How do you see this revival? Why do you think it's happening?
I think it's just empty rhetoric. You know, there is a rise of ethnic nationalism in this region and elsewhere. The European election results, unfortunately, show the rise of the far nationalist right at the present moment, and I think it's reflected there as well. You know, deep down, the Prime Minister of Serbia knows that his people want to be in the European Union. They want to be part of the European mainstream. They've got the talent, the ability, they've got the young people who see a broader horizon than living in the history of the region. So I see that as purely nominal. But you know, they do that. A close friend of mine was on a Danube trip, you know, and he went on the day trip round Belgrade, you know. Oh, these are the buildings that NATO bombed, you know. So he didn't say he was a close friend of the former Secretary General. But, you know, we killed these buildings, but we didn't kill the people in them.
You say it's rhetoric, but 7 months ago, we had 30 fully armed men, arms of which have bases in Serbia, because we found them with their code, registration code. They came to Kosovo, organized a terrorist attack, and one police officer was killed. What do you say to this?
The international community has got to denounce these acts of violence. They have got to denounce any return to the violence of the 1990s, whether it's in the north of Kosovo, whether it's in Serbia, whether it's in Republika Srpska. The international community, you know, has made it clear that this is unacceptable, and it will stop Serbia's ambitions to be part of the normal Europe that the young people of Serbia want to be part of.
There is one bit from that history of the time when you were serving in Kosovo, which remains to this day a bleeding wound. Is the division in Mitrovica, which to this day is causing constant attention. Now, I've asked you about Serbs and Romas being cleansed of Pristina, but Albanians of the north were not protected by NATO to remain in the north. They were ethnically cleansed, and they live in the south and in the rest of Kosovo. What will you say to them today?
Well, I hope that they get back. I hope that Kosovo will be one country again. I'm not involved in current negotiations, and you know, I resent a lot of ex-army generals being armchair generals, and I don't see why I should be an armchair Secretary
I appreciate
General.
you're not involved today, but at the time, what would you say to people, critics would say you allowed the division of the town in an Albanian and Serbian part?
Well, not in my time, frankly. I was there. I've been in Mitrovica. I stood on the bridge. Not in my time.
The biggest riots were in your time.
There were. You know, there is going to be a legacy of what happened. You know, I remember at the time Mr. Kushner, who was going to be here this week, but unfortunately can't be here, saying you can't have years of communist domination and then a period of apartheid and then hope that you're going to produce Switzerland overnight. We're not. I hope that those who are creating trouble will recognize that all they're doing is holding back this country and its people.
But don't you think there was an agreement to allow what was called then the bridge watchers, to allow the Serbian bridge watchers to observe this division, to push for this division between Serb and Albanian part? Didn't you allow bridge watchers to exist as NATO troops?
I don't recall doing that, you know. And anyway, the politicians were not in charge of military deployments. But you know, I regret the fact that Mitrovica and the north is not fully functioning as part of Kosovo, despite the fact that there are Kosovar Serbs in the government, in the parliament, you know, and this country is still a multi-ethnic country. But that division is a matter of some regret, which will only be resolved when ultimately the relationship between Serbia and Kosovo is sorted.
In that, exactly this summer time, 25 years ago, there was chaos and riots in other parts of Kosovo. But there was another nuance of what was happening that is very heartbreaking for us, in that not only were Albanians and Serbs and Romas being revenging on each other, but there was also Albanians were killing Albanians that they thought collaborated or they were political opponents of. We have a few political murders of that time. We call them politically motivated murders. What did you know about them at the time?
Well, I don't recall that happening. It probably did happen. You're talking about a post-war situation. You're talking about a post-oppression situation.
There was a famous journalist called Jamal Mustafa, who was a close associate of Ibrahim Rugova. Do you remember him being shot in '99, immediately after the war, summer of '99,
well, there was a lot of violence at that time. There was a lot of vengeance. There was a lot of strong feelings at that time, which we tried. You know, we tried hard to resolve, and I denounce all of that. You know, I heavily criticize all of that. You know, there needs to be room for reconciliation. There has to be, trade-offs. There has to be compromise. People have to recognize that if they're actually going to produce a future, you know, for the new generation, then they'll have to resolve some of these historical problems, which have nothing whatsoever to do with the day-to-day events today.
Well, Mr. Robertson, most people watching would feel that Kosovo did compromise because we were put through a process, an Ahtisaari package, which made the maximum rights for minorities, guaranteed rights in the parliament, extra municipalities that never existed before became Serbian municipalities. Kosovo is quite conditioned to not being able to make many changes due to all the compromises it made. This was not a country that was allowed to be made a country without compromises. But so what do you say to people who say, we've done all the compromises you've asked us? When is this going to end? When is it ever going to end that you concede stuff from Kosovo Albanians?
How long is a piece of string? I don't know. I don't know the answer. It'll be when the situation arises. And in the meantime, I think both in Serbia and in Kosovo, people have to listen to the advice that is given by the international community. The international community came together to save this country and to save its people. And they did it resolutely, and they did it expensively, and they did it at high risk, but they did it because it was the right thing to do. Now, the international community is sometimes giving messages to Belgrade and to Pristina that are uncomfortable, that may require more compromises, more trade-offs, you know, more reconciliation, but they should listen to that community, because otherwise they wouldn't be around today. Neither Mr. Vučić, who would probably have been eliminated by Milosevic, or by the political leadership here, had it not been for the international community, and therefore the international community is worth listening to.
If after the Second World War, 25 years later, the head of the president of Germany would be Goebbels at the time, who was Minister of Information in Hitler's time, would you, because Vučić was a Minister of Information of Milosevic, if I put that equivalent to you, would you, the Allies, French, British, ever negotiate it with a Germany that was run by fascist Hitler information officers like Goebbels.
Yeah, but this is, we're rendering into an emotional sort of period. I know that you want to provoke.
I'm just telling you that Vučić was part of Milosevic's regime. You're asking us to make a deal and to make a compromise with somebody who agreed with Milosevic's ethnic cleansing campaign.
Well, that's you're expressing a view.
How do you express it?
Well, I just say, look at Northern Ireland. Look at my country. My lifetime, rather than somebody else's lifetime, a generation before. The IRA, the Irish Republican Army, was bombing people and killing. 3,000 people died in the Troubles. They were bombing the Grand Hotel where Margaret Thatcher was sleeping. They were bombing in London and all of that. And eventually, they recognised that they weren't achieving anything through violence. And at that point, the British government had to talk to people who had been organising the killing and the violence that was going on. So when Her Majesty the Queen, the late Queen, shook hands with Martin McGuinness, she was shaking hands with somebody who had been a commander of the IRA, an IRA that had tried to kill the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So sometimes you've got to do pretty difficult things with some pretty difficult people if you're actually going to produce peace in the long term.
Okay, but Kosovo is signing the deal that the internationals asked it to sign. There is an Ohrid agreement where Kosovo has signed its part of the deal, Serbia hasn't, and in the meantime, Kosovo has been put under sanctions, being a country that is completely pro-Ukrainian, pro-Western, and while Serbia, that is completely in support of Putin, the only European country fully, 70% of public opinion in Serbia, according to the polls in Serbia, support the invasion of Ukraine. There's no arms embargo, or there's no embargo against Russia. So we are being told off and sanctions. There's measures against Kosovo, not against Serbia. How do you explain this?
Well, life is going to be difficult as you negotiate through to the point where Serbia eventually has to recognise Kosovo as an independent state. But it won't be an easy track to do it, and therefore it will require many, many trade-offs, much uncomfortable advice to be taken. But, I'm not involved in these negotiations today. I'm a former Secretary General, I'm a former politician.
I know you're not involved, and just because you're not involved, I'm asking you because you're not involved in a situation where not whether we are being in our relations to Serbia, but in a relation to the international community, which is being tougher on Kosovo, putting measures against Kosovo, not putting measures against Serbia, which is even protecting Milan Radojic, which did a terrorist attack on Kosovo. And Serbia is not getting sanctioned while Kosovo is. How do you explain this in relation to an international community?
Well, I'm not here to explain the inexplicable.
But people here feel we've got now an international community that is not fair, an international community that has less credibility and integrity to understand what the history of what went on and how we are positioned against the world, how pro-Western Kosovo is. We feel like Kosovo is not being rewarded for being pro-Western. If we were more pro-Eastern or pro-Russian, we would have been taken seriously. That's what it feels like.
No, I don't think so. You had Tony Blair here this week. You have me here today. You had the former Prime Minister of Italy.
You mean Tony Blair, who's now, who's also on a payroll of Vučić, working for him, doing PR. I mean, we got to tell a spade a spade, right?
Well, yeah. Well, you keep telling me these things.
No, but is he not doing that?
Well, I don't know whether he's doing that or not.
But
he's talking to a lot of different governments in the world, trying to get them to take the democratic path. He's using his skills and his background and his knowledge and his experience to get quite a lot of countries, in order to move down the track of being democratic, being open, being mixed economies. You know, that is what you know, he was my boss, he was my prime minister when I was defense secretary, and anything he is doing is not designed to prop up any dictatorships.
Isn't it cynical to be working for Vučić 25 years after bombing Serbia and making key decisions to bomb Serbia? Why does Tony Blair need to work for
I was recently asked if I would join the advisory board of a think tank in Serbia, and I said yes. I want to use influence in Serbia.
Think tank, yes. But government, Serbian government?
Well, if I was asked to advise the Serbian government,
would you
give them advice?
You would?
I would tell them that they need to resolve the problem with Kosovo if they want to get anywhere near the European Union.
Okay, I'm with you that you would give advice, and I would be happy if you did. But would you get paid?
I don't know whether he's being paid. I don't think he's doing any of that on a paid basis now. He stopped a lot of the consultation stuff that he did before. It's now a very, very reputable think tank. He's got a lot of people working on a lot of big international and social issues. I think he closed down all of the consultancy business some time ago. He's only interested now in resolving some of the key problems that face the world. And I believe his experience and expertise, and indeed his courage, which was on display during the war in Kosovo, is of enormous help to the countries in this region.
One particular thing I want to ask you about is that we had organized crime be very active since 2000. It was, in Kosovo, those years were marked by a rise in chaos as well as organized crime. What did you know about it at the time? How, when you were together trying to deal with this, did you feel like, okay, we have to close one eye and not deal with this?
No, I recollect Goran Svilanovic, who was the foreign minister after Milosevic in Yugoslavia, and he came to NATO headquarters and he made a very powerful speech, and he said, can you imagine how prosperous the Balkans would be today if we politicians had the same degree of interethnic cooperation as the criminals? And I think that was a valuable point which we took. You know, for organized crime, they don't recognize borders, they don't recognize interethnic histories, you know, they don't care who they're dealing with, and frankly, so should the politicians. You know, the borders are out of date. You know, they don't exist. The single market that was the hallmark of the European Union produced prosperity for every country, including mine, though we were daft enough to come out of the European Union. So, you know, creating a common market in the Balkans makes absolute common sense. So borders are not there, but the politicians need to be as interethnically cooperative as these organized criminals, and maybe they would be as wealthy, and the countries would be as wealthy as the criminals.
Going through the archives of this Reporting House project we are doing for the 25th anniversary, I saw footages of you, and one left a particular impression on me in how easygoing you were with the people, because you were in a Poklek school, meeting children of the Poklek school, and you had a red nose on you, and you knew that cameras are filming you, this may not look appropriate for a general. You were very into the activity, you were very communicative with the children, not with the camera. You didn't care what the camera was doing. What happened after that event? First of all, what was the event about, and how was that photo used and abused?
This was the first anniversary of the start of the bombing in the year 2000. I'd taken over as Secretary General of NATO. Poklek was a village which had been attacked by Serb paramilitaries. They had killed, I think, 20 children in a house along with their families. It was an appalling war crime, and we went there to basically honour them on that first anniversary day. But it also happened to be in the UK, and I think throughout Europe, Red Nose Day, where Comic Relief raises money, and they expect people to go around with the red noses. So the children, you know, who were oblivious to the horror of the past wanted. They were wearing red noses, and they wanted the visitors to do it as well. So, you know, you could be somber and serious, and I was, because it was a horrible story that was represented. But at the same time, these little children were the future, and they were immune from the story of the horror. So I thought, you just join in. So General Reinhardt, who was the commander of KFOR, and I both put the on. General Wesley Clark, the Supreme Allied Commander, put the red nose on as well. Every Russian newspaper carried the photograph as if it was a sort of, you know.
So Russians abused that photograph, and
yeah, well,
they used it as what?
Well, I think to ridicule the Secretary General of NATO. I
so
don't think they
did you regret it?
Not at all, not for a moment. It was a connection with the children at a time when this school had been desecrated. I live in a small town in Scotland where there was a school shooting and children were killed and a teacher was killed. So it's in my heart. And to go back to that school where another school had been affected in the same way made a huge impression on me. And I've been back to that school. I've been back to that community since then, and they gave me a painting that was made in the school of flowers in the field with the bodies, the skeletons underneath it. It hangs in my office in Parliament as a reminder. You know, I ask people to look at it all the time. So I'm going to mention it when I speak to the parade tomorrow, because it made such an impact on me, both the horror but also the hope. And I think that is the story of Poklek. A horrible history, but also a degree of hope of kids who laughed at us wearing a red nose on Red Nose Day. Maybe that sums it up.
Or what amazes you about, do you remember what left an impression on you, apart from Poklek visit? What left an impression on you on those 3 years you were living here? What was maybe, let me say, one of the key memories and best memories you have? Because I'm asking you to recall the chaos, and I'm asking you about it, but what was good about that time?
Well, you know, there were many times, because I saw the country beginning to revive and to grow and to come back to normal. And you see it now. It's quite a dazzling thing. I was saying to the soldiers on the plane last night, you know, wait until you see. You were here in 1999.
Were you ever in the dark because it was time of electricity restrictions, or as NATO you always had electricity?
I can't really remember.
You cannot.
You know, because you flew in and you went around, you met all the VIPs, and then you left again. But you know, it was seeing the country develop and grow and become a normal capital city through the traffic. You think, well, there wasn't any traffic there. There was hardly any cars on the road.
Now, I must say, touch wood, you look amazing compared. You look like you haven't changed at all. But there's a couple of people who you were meeting at the time that are not with us anymore. I want to ask you about ever meeting Ibrahim Rugova. Did you meet him?
I met him several times.
What was he like, in terms that we know what was he like, but what left an impression on you? What was your relationship?
He was almost sort of saintly. You know, despite the fact that, you know, he was battling against these horrible forces, you know, he managed to keep a dignity about him that was amazing. So I have a box at home filled with stones. With
crystals. So you got a box. I mean, most people have one. You got a crystal every time you saw him?
Every time I saw him, either in Brussels.
And you would see him how often?
Well, I have a box of there must be about a dozen of these various crystals and stones.
So is there anything you remember from these meetings that left an impression on you?
Well, he was a man of you know, quiet authority. You know, despite all of what he'd gone through. You remember, I'd seen a lot of people like Vladislav Havel in the Czech Republic, who were imprisoned and then who managed to rise above it. No feeling of vengeance at all. And Rugova was like that. You know, despite everything that had happened to him and to the people he led, he still managed to look to the future And that was the thing. He wanted his country to be normalized again and not seek vengeance, not see retribution for what they had gone through. So I have a very vivid memory of him with the scarf around his neck and passing me this little package with yet another stone in it, and think, what is this? You know, sort of. But and some of them I think were very precious.
And as proof to what you're saying is also the big decision that was controversial at the time for him to allow a prime minister from the, what's it called now, the war wing in Kosovo. So there was peaceful wing like LDK, and there were all the parties that came from the KLA. And he had to make, because he hadn't won enough votes, he had to make a coalition. And it was controversial that while a lot of former war wing parties were being viewed as the people who revenged on the LDK, he nevertheless had to go in coalition with Bayram Rejepi. So that's kind of proof of his level of modesty in the end, allowing the biggest opponents.
But wise judgment as well. I remember Prime Minister Rejepi.
That's the second one I wanted to ask you about. What was Rejepi like?
Yeah, I know. Well, he took me to Novo Selo, you know, one of my last visits, you know, out there. And again, just to meet the people and to meet the children, you know, that these were the future. And it was so lovely. They didn't know who we were. You know, the people...
Rejepi didn't give you stones. What did he give you?
I don't think he gave me anything.
What was he like?
Good wishes. But a nice, quiet, studious individual, but you know, absolutely committed to building a multi-ethnic Kosovo. Both of these incredible individuals, you know, had that deep belief that Kosovo could be a country united, at peace with its neighbours and with
Okay,
itself.
so you had to deal with those two people that are deceased. I want to ask you about two that are not. You had to deal with Agim Ceku. What was he like?
Very good man, good soldier, and he made the transition from the KLA and being a commander of a guerrilla army into creating the Kosovo Protection Force, essentially a civil emergency force as well. And he used his skills and his talent and his experience in a completely different way, you know, to the role that he previously had. So General Ceku was somebody I greatly admired because of that. Making that transition was not easy, but he managed it.
Another person you had to deal with, I believe, was Hashim Thaçi. What was he like?
Yeah. A formidable individual, you know, a natural leader, you know, tricky. Of that is true, but then, you know, good politicians often are very tricky as well. An individual of some substance. I was there at his book launch, his autobiography book launch in London.
Yeah.
I made a speech at that time saying that he had to use these leadership talents to create the united Kosovo that we all believed would take place. So he got a bit of a lecture that day. It wasn't sort of me telling him he was the most wonderful person in the world. It was me telling him that he had a big job to do, and you know, he still has. But you know, he was a tricky individual with enormous leadership qualities, and you know, who knows? Maybe the future will bring him, you know, back into contention.
I cannot not ask you, what do you think of the fact that all these KLA leaders, Hashim Thaçi including, are now answering for crimes which are done also on the time that you were leader of NATO and were supposed to keep peace here and keep order and get people not killed? There's people being testified now that they were attacked by the KLA, and that's why Thaçi is there. What do you feel like about it now?
Well, there is a process in place, and that process will take its turn. It will examine all of the evidence, and it will come to a conclusion. You know, I used to have to deal with Mrs. Carla Del Ponte, who was in charge of the International Criminal Tribunal in the former Yugoslavia, and a very, very tough lady.
Yeah, what was she like?
She gave me a very, very hard time in terms of the war criminals that we were not, or the people indicted for war crimes that we were not arresting and delivering to her tribunal. So, you know, the tough love, you know, tough justice. So let us see, there is a process underway.
How did you respond to her at the time when she told you those, it's serious accusations to tell you you're not delivering the people who are involved in war crimes? For someone of your stature and credibility, I mean, what were you saying back?
Well, I told her we were. We were doing everything that we possibly could to find Radovan Karadzic and Mladic. And we were. We spent a lot of time.
She wasn't asking you about Karadzic and Mladic.
Yeah, no, these were the two. These were the two key ones.
She was asking you about why are you not delivering Mladic and Karadzic, or asking you about not delivering other generals?
No, we had delivered other ones. We had arrested. Even when I was Defence Secretary of the United Kingdom, we delivered.
But how were you supposed to deliver Mladic and Karadzic in Serbia when you had you had no mission in Serbia?
Well, we didn't know if they were in Serbia. They could have been in Bosnia. They could have been anywhere.
So how does Bosnia compare to Kosovo? Because you served there too.
Well, no, Bosnia was a part of our remit. I was in opposition in the United Kingdom when the military action took place. So I was sort of in the mopping up of when we came to power. So,
do you regret, as British politics, you didn't intervene before Srebrenica?
I think we should have. Of course, we should have. We can now look back with regret at all of that, and we should learn lessons from all of that about intervening. And that is in many ways why we intervened in Kosovo, because we recognised that we had not intervened early enough in Bosnia to stop the violence from going on. And that was the new leadership, because we were all new. All of the ministers in France and Germany and the UK were all new. We'd come to power. All of us had demonstrated against the Vietnam War in our youth. Joschka Fischer had been demonstrating even more recently than that. And we said, well, that was the wrong war. This is the right war. We have to take action, even before the international community know what's going on. We know what's going on. You know, we've seen the intelligence reports. We've seen Operation Horseshoe on paper. We know what Milosevic is about. And that's why we took action before the cattle trucks were taking the refugees into Macedonia. Maybe if we'd waited for a couple of weeks, then the world would have known exactly what we were doing. But when we did it, it was controversial. The moment the cattle trucks moved into Macedonia, the world knew, and suddenly public opinion changed.
In the end of the interview, I want to ask you about one particular piece of reminders that I'm coming across in these archives. I had to listen recently to an interview that a Russian spokesperson and a Russian general were giving to a VOA journalist that were saying how we are patrolling together with Americans and with the KLA. We are talking to the KLA in Rahovec. Do you find it remarkable that your troops were in the same peacekeeping mission with Russia in Kosovo, and there's that existing evidence that they patrolled in Rahovec with the US Army, looking back from now?
Yeah, they did. They did. It's not remarkable, but the Russians should remember it. Vladimir Putin should remember that we were together. You know, they tried to use Kosovo as an example of the West aggressively taking a chunk out of a sovereign nation state, Yugoslavia. And yet they were there, and they were with us. You know, I tell this story, if I can burden you.
Yes.
That on the day of the NATO-Russia summit in 2002, I came out with Vladimir Putin out of the press conference, and we walked up back to the conference center, and we passed 3 officers of the Italian Carabinieri.
Yes.
And the Carabinieri, they do big uniforms, you know. And I stopped and I said, Mr. President, these are officers of the Carabinieri. And I said, they go from village policemen up to special forces. And I said, they have been especially useful in the Balkans. And I said, these medals they are wearing are the NATO medals for service in the Balkans, which go out in my name to these soldiers. And I said, your soldiers who served in Kosovo and in Bosnia are entitled to wear these medals as well. And I said, but of course, I said in the old days, a Russian soldier wearing a NATO medal would end up in jail. And he smiled and he said, those would be the lucky ones. So we had a good relationship then.
But they were part of, were they part of KFOR? So KFOR wasn't just NATO, right?
No, we had other countries as well in KFOR. Yeah, we had a lot of Muslim countries in S4 in Bosnia.
It's actually a remarkable story because it just shows they would end up, let's go back to that word, they would be lucky if they ended up in jail, right?
Well, that was his way of saying but he was smiling that day. He's not smiling anymore. And we must remember the lessons of Kosovo. You know, the Ukrainians are fighting for their lives, for Western values, and they're fighting for us as well.
So, Mr. Robertson, aren't you disappointed that the West is not militarily helping Ukraine far more, knowing what Russia is, what Russia represents, how Russia, even in the British soil, poisoned people, yet Ukraine is not being maximally helped?
Well, it is being helped. It is being enormously helped. We are sending them the weaponry that they want and that they need in order to drive out the Russian invaders. They don't want boots on the ground. They don't want American.
But why did you militarily help Kosovo and you can't do the same for Ukraine?
Well, we didn't. We bombed Kosovo and Yugoslavia from the air, and then eventually we came in when the
Ukrainians
would
find that useful for them if you bomb the Russian targets within Ukraine. Why aren't you helping them?
It's not in any way comparable.
I know it's not.
To do with that. And we didn't want to have a fight with the Russians in these days as well. The Russians were coming down when they sent the tanks from Tuzla down in the final.
Are you saying you don't want to fight with Russia now, or that Ukrainians are not worthy of the engagement of NATO?
No, but we don't want a confrontation, World War III between NATO and the Russian Federation. We're trying to avoid that, but we are giving, the West is giving the Ukrainians the ability to be able to fight themselves, and up to now they have done remarkably well.
Not enough.
Vladimir Putin.
Not enough is reaching the fronts. Ukraine is not advancing recently.
The material is getting through now, and we're beginning to see, I was looking at reports only this morning saying that they are beginning to make inroads there. They're attacking targets in Crimea on a regular basis and providing great embarrassment to Russia. So Vladimir Putin set out to stop the onward march of NATO, and we have 2 new members in NATO. He set out to divide the Europeans, and they're united as never before. He set out to divide Europe from America, and it's welded together. He set out to take over Ukraine in 3 days, and now 2.5 years later, he's basically not moved beyond the point where he started out. This was a colossal misjudgment by Vladimir Putin, and the Ukrainians are fighting for their lives, for their country, and they're fighting for us as well.
Should we worry about Russian risk and influence in the Balkans?
Yes, we should. Of course we should.
So how should we fight against it, and what must be done?
Well, we must do it collectively, and we must do it together. We must recognize that they are going to be involved in cyber attacks, in sabotage, in interfering in election, in misinformation and disinformation, and we've got to be alert to all of that and stop it when we see it.
Is there Russian influence? Is there a risk of Russia advancing its propaganda, disinformation, and influence in the Balkans?
Not just in the Balkans, they will do it wherever they can.
But in the Balkans? More so because we have fragile institutions?
In many ways, I think the Balkans have become almost an adventure playground for the way in which Russia goes around it. I remember the Prime Minister of what is now North Macedonia saying to me, the Russian ambassador came and said, if you join NATO, you'll be a target. And he said, what, me or my country? He said, both. So they are quite explicit, quite direct in what they say about what their ambitions are in this region. And I don't believe it stops with this region. It goes well beyond that as well. We need to be wary, and that's why winning in Ukraine is so important for all of us.
Lord Robertson, thank you for being here. Thank you for coming back to Kosovo, being so candid with us, and hopefully your health keeps you well and you come back as much as possible.
Thank you for the chance.
Ishte ky Lord Robertson, I cili ka udhëheq me misionin e KFOR-it NATO-s në vitet 99-2003 në Kosovë. Kaq kishim për sonte, vazhdoni me ashujt kallxo.com deri në emisionin e radhës. Mirëmbëjtje.